And I think it comes down to authenticity and transparency. We are not comfortable with that. I think men who listen to your podcast, they listen to your podcast because they want to hear other men talk about what they struggle with.
Yes.
And they don't want like, oh my goodness, I struggle with having a quiet time every day with the
Yeah.
Lord. You're like, no, I struggle with this, and it's gritty and it's dirty and it's difficult. And sometimes I feel like absolutely giving up. Or I feel like a little boy, the little boy that my dad shamed when I was 5 years old. I keep reverting back to that little boy. How do I move beyond that?
Welcome to The Climb, where I help Christian men live fully, lead boldly, and leave a legacy that matters. I'm your host, Teko Bailey, husband, father, life coach, and your guide in the climb. Whether you're navigating fatherhood, building a business, or simply longing to live more purpose, this is a space to rise. Glenn Stanton, you are the director of the Global Family Studies at Focus on the Family. What led you to that, and what are some of the things that you're observing about families as you've done some of your researches and perhaps had different conversations?
Well, Teko, first of all, thanks for having me with you. I'm looking forward to the conversation. And I have been doing this work as the director of family formation studies at Focus on the Family since 1993. Basically, what I do is I get to research the family from a sociological, anthropological, and theological perspective. So I'm studying the family as an institution. I did that work for Dr. Dobson for many, many, many years, and now I do that for Jim Daly and the rest of the staff at Focus on the Family. So it's my job to be as smart as I possibly can be to help Focus on the Family be as smart as we possibly can be on understanding the family as a social institution. Why does it matter? Why is it important? Why did God create us in such a way that he made us for what the anthropologists call pair bonding? Why is monogamy important? Why is family commitment important? Why is parenthood, fatherhood, motherhood? Why are all those things important? So I get to look at the academic literature and mine out of that insights for why the ideal of family matters and is so important.
Well, I feel like each of those topics deserves its own conversation. But if you can sort of package from the anthropological perspective, moving into a biblical worldview, and sort of maybe if you can condense for our listeners, grouping those together, because I think our society right now is in turmoil. We're not sure what the foundations of family should look like. And even in the church, we find where you think we would know some of the answers to that. Unfortunately, not many of us do. Take us a little bit back to some of what the foundations of family should look like, what God originally intended, and how we can navigate some of that in our culture today.
Yeah, that's a great, great question. And there's a really tight connection between what anthropologists tell us and what scripture tells us. In fact, Edward Westermarck, he was one of the first guys to really study marriage from an anthropological point of view. I've got this wonderful set of books from 1920, a 3-volume set, his History of Human Marriage, Edward Westermarck. And he says, it seems probable that marriage came up from primeval habit, which means like we don't know a time in human history where there hasn't been this thing called marriage. Now, from a biblical point of view, marriage was the first institution that God created for man and woman. He creates Adam and Eve in his image, in his likeness. He calls them forth, blesses them, and calls them forth to multiply. And he performs their marriage. And so we have to understand that marriage is the first human institution. The anthropologists tell us that secularly, and scripture tells us that. And that it's interesting, a number of years ago, a number of very sophisticated academics, anthropologists, published a paper in an elite journal on the puzzle of monogamy and why does monogamy help humanity? Monogamy makes men better. It settles them down. It focuses their attention on one woman and their common children. And it protects women. It protects women from being collected as items in a harem. And it protects them from competition, and it democratizes sexuality, if you will. Every man gets one woman, every woman gets one man, and that cuts down competition, and it ends up protecting women. So those are the things that we have to understand, is that marriage is a fundamental, primary, foundational human institution from secular anthropology and from scripture, and that it is the union of male and female for the procreation, for the furtherance of the human race. And the decline of population is the biggest pressing human problem that we have today. Not too many people, but slowing population down. We need procreation. And then the next thing that it does is, again, protecting women. Monogamy, again, settles men down, and it focuses them on one woman. It's interesting when you think about the word matrimony. Matrimony, if we break it down from the Latin, from the old language, it means matra, maternal, matrilineal. It's for the mother, and then moni is support, obligation too. So matrimony is the man's obligation to the woman to the potential mother of his children, for him to settle down, to get a ring on his finger to say,
Wow.
I belong to this woman. She is my intention. She is my purpose. Now, the other is husband. Husband comes from the Old Norse word husband, meaning bound to this house. My ring says that I have an address. My address in Colorado Springs on Palm Drive, that's where I live. And the
Yeah.
woman of that house is the woman that I am responsible for loving, caring, protecting, providing for. That is what matrimony and husbandry means, is the man settling down to focus on what nature and what God has given him, the woman, the wife that he is committed to.
I'm going to pause right there because you've said some very significant and key fundamental, I can't stress how fundamental this is, that you've just said in just like the first couple of minutes. Because, well, several things. I was at a conference recently, Dr. Chris Harper from Better Men, Man, he said, similar to what you've said, he's noticed that in societies where, or in a period of time when men would finish high school education and then get married, have a family, it brings steadiness, it brings stability. And in those communities and societies, they have done very well. When we move away from the path of getting married early, because I think society looks at marriage sort of a bit negative, or, we tend to get married later and later and later for a myriad of reasons. But from his observation and different studies, in those periods and societies where men finish a high school education, get married, start a family, those societies tend to be stable because it brings weight, it brings a steadiness, and it brings this sort of security. But I love how you also break down matrimony and husband, because I don't think, well, at least for my generation, I don't think we know those words have that depth of meaning. Right now, I think marriage is just this big fancy thing that we do if we have a lot of money, or, we take out a loan or whatever. And it is more to show people that we can do this thing versus the commitment to what we're saying yes to and following through. And so I love how you bring us back to some of that. And I know there are different situations that happens that might make marriage seem not so good. And maybe if you kind of connect some of those pieces, because our culture today doesn't necessarily support marriage in some regard. Yeah. Talk to me a little bit more as
we unfortunately see marriage as self-fulfillment. I mean, exactly what you were talking about, Teko. There's this idea that sociologists talk about, is marriage as a cornerstone or marriage as a capstone. Marriage is a capstone today, which it's the icing on the cake. I do my education, I get my job, I establish my career, I get a bunch of money in the bank, and now I'm ready to marry, which is exactly what you're talking about is the opposite of that, is marriage as a cornerstone to say, I graduate from high school, I'm mature, not as mature as I'm going to be, but I know what I want in life. I want to commit myself to a woman, and I want that woman to come alongside me, and I want to build a life with her. I want to establish a life together. And that might mean if college is in your future, going to college together. She helps you move through college. You help her go to college if she wants to as well. You're building that life together. The marriage is the foundation, the catapult, if you will, of launching you into adulthood. That is how humanity has done it for millennia. And it's only in the last couple of decades that we've thought about, oh, no, 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 I need to get everything together before I go to get married. And that was really backwards. And that idea is really not serving us well. And so we need to understand and see marriage, a man linking himself to a woman linking herself to a man, and them committing themselves to one another to go forth for better or for worse, sickness and in health, richer or for poorer. And in those early years, you're going to be poor. You're going to
Yeah.
be poor. It's just going to be the nature of things. But there's a wonderful joy in working those things out. Like,
Yeah.
you know what? It's Tuesday and we've got $20 left to last us till the next payday. How are we going to do that? You know what? We're going to do it together.
Come
And
on.
being innovative and creative about those things. That is how men develop into real men, by having a good woman next to them, to those women calling the manhood out of the man,
Yeah.
and the man realizing, I've got to step up. I've got to become who I need to be.
What would you say are maybe some of the factors that has pushed us away from that norm, if you may, or that perspective on family life and marriage? Because it is true. I guess we live in a postmodern culture. Well, at least on the Western side of the world, mostly. What is it that's interfering with that worldview and that framework, in a sense, that has been practiced for many generations?
I would say it's two things, Tico. It's one, a commercialization culture, meaning everything exists for my satisfaction. You know what? Like we go online and we're like, oh, I like that shirt better than that shirt. We go look at a car. That car has everything I'm looking for. We look at an iPhone, we look at a computer, we look at a stereo. We wanted to have everything that we needed to have, and we will not settle for anything less. And we bring that idea into relationships. You know what? I'm looking for a woman that does this, 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 and this, and she is just perfect for me. Well, guess what, buddy? There is no woman that is just perfect for you. Your job is to try to be that perfect man for that woman. But we also have to understand that the marriage vows themselves anticipate problems, anticipate difficulties. A theologian a number of years ago, he came up with a great, great phrase. And I love it because it's so stark, but it's so true. He says, we always marry the wrong person. Okay,
Wow.
what does he mean by that? Does it mean that every marriage is a disaster? He goes, no, every marriage is a marriage between two imperfect human beings. You know what? Your wife is not going to satisfy you like that car you purchased that you think is just perfect for you, or that
Yeah.
device, or that shirt, or that home, or whatever. Your wife is not a consumer product for you. Your wife is a human being that has been brought into your life for you to sacrifice yourself for, love, care, help, lift up, and that you are called to be a different kind of man because of the woman that God gave you. That is the process of marrying. I think about this, Tico. You think about the old Promise Keepers events where you had huge football stadiums filled with men. And, find the largest auditorium, the largest stadium that you can think of, and pack that thing just jammed full with men, and hundreds of thousands of men there. And ask the men, those of you who have been married 30 years or more, let me ask you, did your wife make you the man that you are today? What you'll hear is laughter.
Yeah.
Not laughter because it's a ridiculous question,
Yeah,
laughter because it's an
it's true.
obvious
It
question,
is
right? Like,
true.
oh my goodness, I would not be who I am without this
Absolutely.
woman in my life, right?
Yeah. No, absolutely. Absolutely. So then how do we move forward as a culture? Because and okay, let me say this. Even before we get to that question, what place does brotherhood have in all of this as men think about getting married, not really sure what marriage will unfold or entail? Because it is true. I think we go into marriages with different sorts of expectations and what we can get from it, but not necessarily what we're prepared to give. And, you kind of have all this checklist, and maybe after the second or third year, if that long, you realize, all of these things don't really tick off that I was expecting I would
Yeah,
receive from my marriage. And so
yeah.
we go into a turmoil, and we start freaking out for whatever reasons, especially if you have a child that comes into play very quickly, and with this high level of expectation, oftentimes a lot of it not spoken or communicated, but you're expecting it. What part does brotherhood play in maybe supporting or helping the guy to be ready or navigating as he goes through it, as well as the man being ready to receive from his wife and showing up in the ways that he should?
Yeah, I love that question. And when you asked me the previous question, I said there were two parts of this. One is
Yes.
commercialization. Your brotherhood question brings up the second one. The second is atomization. That's a fancy word for we atomize ourselves like atoms, like I'm just
Yeah.
me. I don't need anybody else. But think about the traditional marriage or wedding. You have a best man. Now, today, that best man is the guy who gives you your party, your bachelor party. He's the guy that helps you party. Like, no, your best man is your brother.
Come
Maybe
on.
sometimes that's literally your brother, or it's your best dude in life. And that man is there to really, in a way, say, dude, I am going to be your wife's biggest champion in making sure that you be the man that you need to be. And I'm going to be there for you. And brotherhood is absolutely essential. In fact, I would say that a man going into marriage thinking it's just about him and his wife, that's that atomization, if you will, of the marriage union. Marriage, that's another thing anthropologically, too. Marriage always takes place within the community. This idea of just you and your spouse going off to City Hall and just doing this, like, that's not the way that it's typically done. Marriage is always about, even in primitive, undeveloped cultures, the wedding, the vows, whatever those vows may be, whether it's jumping over the broom or whatever the
Yeah.
ceremony, it's done in community because the marriage is a community institution. This saying, basically, the woman's family is saying, sir, if you want sexual access to this woman, we celebrate that, we welcome that, but we want to hear you speak some words of absolute, undying commitment to this woman and your potential common children. That's what anthropologically the marriage vow always is. And the man needs his community alongside him to say, as you make this commitment, we are standing with you
Yeah.
to help you succeed here. It's going to be hard, it's going to be difficult, but we need to hold you accountable, and you need to hold yourself accountable to us because of this wonderful, beautiful, life changing commitment that you are making to this young woman. I want to tell you a quick story. I remember the best man I'm unfortunately divorced. We can talk about that a little bit
Yeah.
later. I just got remarried earlier this year, but my first marriage, I married very young. I was 20 years old. My best man, when I went to, I mean, we were buds. And when I went to his wedding, he got married before I did. And I remember when he left that wedding, his name's Tommy. And I'm like, Tommy is a different guy than when he rolled up to the church.
Come on.
He is now a husband. And I can't just call him anytime I want and say, come on, man, let's go surf or let's
Yeah.
go skate. You
Yeah.
know, he has obligations. I was understanding as a young man at that time that marriage changed my buddy and that marriage changes me. Marriage changes all of us and it gives us different obligations and commitments.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's a really good point there. Because my question is, why have we moved away so much from this brotherhood experience? What is it that's lacking in our culture? Because yes, we do have friends, we do have male friends, we hang out, but you're right, they tend to kind of just throw the bachelor party and do all those fancy things. But how can we, what's missing from this deeper relational aspect of the brotherhood journey, if you have any answer to this? Because I
Yeah.
find a lot of men are struggling, and first of all, a lot of us are lonely, a lot of us are just, you know, we had friendships and then we don't have friendships, and we don't necessarily know how to build more of those good friendships that can sustain us. I
Mhm.
even think of some of my friends that I hang out with, and I have to push to build the relationship. Sometimes you don't get the same level of effort in those friendships, and you have to say, hey, maybe these are some of the things I'm expecting in our friendship. Otherwise, you don't see it. And I just wonder sometimes, like, why is this not reciprocal? Why are we not seeing it? Is this just because of a family background or just society at large that is preventing us as men to have deeper relationships or not feeling like that should be the norm?
Tico, that is a massively huge question. And we could like just spend a whole hour just
Absolutely.
talking about that. But I think what it comes to is it's family of origin issues, but it's also the culture that we live in. And I think it comes down to authenticity and transparency. We are not comfortable with that. I think men who listen to your podcast, they listen to your podcast because they want to hear other men talk about what they struggle with. And
Yes.
they don't want like, oh my goodness, I struggle with having a quiet time every day with the
Yeah.
Lord. You're like, no, I struggle with this and it's gritty and it's dirty and it's difficult. And sometimes I feel like absolutely giving up. Or I feel like a little boy, the little boy that my dad shamed when I was 5 years old. I keep reverting back to that little boy. How do I move beyond that? And we need to be able to talk about our vulnerabilities. We need to be, that's not a weakness. That's an absolute strength to have the confidence to say, you know what I'm dealing with? I'm dealing with this, this, and this today. Can you help me? And most men, worth their salt, worth their measure, will say, like, dude, I am all in for that. And let me tell you my issues. But first of all, is to be there for your buddy. I mean, we think about war stories, we think about difficulties, we think about, things like that historically, but we have those same sort of struggles today within our marriages, within our work, within the culture that we live. As fathers, the problems that we have with our kids, the struggles that we have with our kids, we need to be willing to be absolutely hardcore, rock bottom, vulnerable with each other, and knowing that, Tico, nothing that I can say. Here's another thing. I've got a few buddies which I go, nothing that I can say will blow their minds.
Yeah.
Meaning, I can tell them anything.
Come on.
I don't tell them everything. We need to have a filter, right? But we need to be able to be honest to say, hey, let me be honest with you about something that I'm struggling with, and knowing that they are a vault.
Yeah.
That information is not going anywhere, and they can give you the truth, the love, the difficulty that you need to hear
Come
about
on.
you in that situation, right?
I love that. And I think, well, secretly, every man is looking for that kind of support in
Yeah.
his brothers. And I'm hoping that as guys listen on to this conversation, they will realize that the other man or the friend that they have is looking for that, even though they might not be able to fully communicate it, but we're kind of giving them language. Glenn, I think every man goes through a climb, a difficult season or experience that he's been through or experiencing. And I know you've touched on a few for yourself. One of them was your divorce and some of how that impacted you. Talk to me a little bit about that and maybe just some of the things you've learned through that and what that experience was like for you.
Yeah, yeah. I have not talked about this much, but yeah, my divorce, it separation happened in my family in 2013. I left my family home. My wife at the time, and I even hate the phrase ex-wife, but that's what she is. My ex-wife, she and I had 5 beautiful, lovely children. They're all in their 30s now. But our home had grown quite volatile emotionally. I had a responsibility in that. She had a responsibility in that. And I left my home thinking one day that I need to take myself out of the home in order to give my home peace. As I look back, I'm not sure that was a good decision, but it was the right decision at the time. My wife was asking me for that, and I felt like I needed to give that to my children, a home of peace. And I thought I would have left the home for a month, 2 months, maybe 6 months. We would work out the issues that we had to work out, and I would come back into the home and things would be good. It was the hardest decision that I ever had to make, to tell my young kids, Daddy's moving out for a while. And what happened was I never moved back in. I never came back home. We were separated for a long, long time. I don't know where she was during that time, if she was completely satisfied with having me out of the house. But I wanted to do what I needed to do to try to come back into the house. And that never happened. And after a number of years of separation, we finally divorced. She filed for divorce. I got served papers at work by an armed sheriff. That was not a good time. Even after that, even after papers were filed, we went to a marriage intensive. We went there for a couple of days. We didn't stay in the same room together, but I was hopeful
Yeah.
that this marriage intensive, in fact, it was something that Focus on the Family does. It's called Hope Restored, and it was in Branson, Missouri. And my ex-wife and I had a wonderful time at that retreat. And I was super hopeful. In fact, I called one of my buddies and I said, I think this retreat is going to do it. And the last night, she said to me, you know, Glenn, I have no interest whatsoever in reconciling with you. And Teko, it was like, and she had her struggles too. She had her hurts that I caused to her too. I want to own all of that. But when she said that to me that night at that retreat, and we had been getting along so well, and she was enjoyable. We were not intimately involved. She was staying in one room, I was staying in another. But I remember I took her back to her room and I dropped her off, and I was hopeful. And she said, Glenn, now you know that I have no interest in reconciling. And I pulled up my facade, I held it together, and I said, I understand that. I went back to my room and I don't even know what I felt. I felt, Teko, I felt like this was my feelings. It made no sense at the time, but I felt I want to go get in my car and I want to drive east to the Atlantic Ocean and I want to just keep going.
Yeah.
Like I'm done. I have nothing to live for. I wasn't suicidal, but it was
Yeah.
just like I want to just disappear. But I knew that that was not an option and I had to put it together. And I didn't put it together the next day or the next day or the next week or the next month. I put it together over a very, very, very long period of time. And I walked through the divorce. It was surreal. And I would just say with time, God met me in the midst of that. But it was a long, long time. and it was difficult. And buddies that I have going through the same thing, that's the advice that I give them is like, dude, it is a long, long, hard walk, but you can make it. You just have to do it. It sounds so trite. It sounds so little, but one step after the other, one day at a time, survive and realize that you have to own your crap. You have to own your sins. You have to own your violation that you contributed to the death of your relationship. But your self esteem, your worth is not based in what somebody else thinks about you. It's your standing as a child of God, as a man of God, as the father to your children, and as somebody who means something to the friends that you have. That is what got me through all of that.
I have a ton of questions, and I know we can't answer all of them, but thank you for sharing that with us. That's a very tender experience.
Yeah.
Looking back, what helped you get up out of bed? Because I don't know if I could wake up, What helped you to get out of bed, and what sustained you throughout that period as you drove east and realized things weren't coming back together?
Yeah. When I drove back home after that retreat, I felt numb. I felt empty. I was renting a room with from these two other guys. I mean, and it was a pigsty house. It was horrible. It was bad. But that's what I had. And that's what I had to live with. How did I get up out of bed? You know what, Tico? There were days I didn't. I mean, I remember like texting my boss, like, dude, not going to make it in today.
Yeah.
And it was like, I just can't get up. There were times that I would sleep for unbelievably long periods of time. Like, how do you sleep for 16 hours?
Yeah.
You do it because of depression. But I had to realize I would really it would come down to this. I mean, this is how radical it was. It's like, Glenn, are you breathing? Yes. Cherish that breath. You're
Wow.
breathing and do something with that life that your breath gives you. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, that's what I had to do some of those days. Some days I didn't even want to recognize that. But friends helped me through it, and they were guy friends, but I had a very small circle of buddies that were there with me, and they helped me through. Their wives helped me through too, because having them as women speak into my life,
Yeah.
you know what, Glenn? You're a rear end when you act like this, and this. And my wife would say that, and I would hear that from these other women, like,
Yeah.
okay, it's not just her. I
Yeah.
need to go to work on fixing those things. But then they would also say, but Glenn, you're a good man. You're
Yeah.
a loving man. You're a caring man. And it wasn't their duty to do that, but they did that. And so that's another thing is the men and women in your life to speak to you, to speak into your life, to deliver bad news to you and news that you need to take and that you need to hear, but also good news as well.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times we'll feel like an absolute crap show. And I did feel like that. Like, Glenn, you don't deserve anything because you had this wonderful family and you couldn't hold it together. Well, in one sense, it wasn't my job to hold it together. But we as men put that responsibility on us. We have it, we hold it, we are the man of the house, but we are the servant of the house as well. And the husband, the house bond. You're the bond servant of that home to serve those. And even as I was separated from my children, and that was one of the most brutal things that I had to go through. And even to this day, I'm still separated from some of them. But I look for the long game. That's the other thing that men in this situation need to know is play the long game. Always meet your children's hurts with as much kindness as you possibly can muster because they're hurting, they're wounded, they need you to be the leader. They need you to be the one that pours into their life. And I wish that I could have poured into my kids' lives more than I was able to. The divorce, the separation created boundaries there, which I
Yeah.
hated.
Yeah.
Hated absolutely. But it's important for men in that situation to remember the long game, that what is happening today will not always be the way that it is. You have to hope that that relationship with your dear children will be restored one day. And that's a hope that I have to hold on, that I have to cling to.
Absolutely. I like that you talk about playing the long game, because I think within that too, you give God the opportunity to bring restoration and healing without you forcing it in your timing.
Right.
If we were to look back and even from a place of wisdom or advice, what would you say to men who are on the verge of navigating or need to sharpen, otherwise it could lead to a divorce, or even before it gets there? What are some things that we can preemptively do to maybe not get that far in the relationship? What are some of the
Yeah.
things we can look out for, and how can we not necessarily safeguard ourselves, but for lacking of a better word, how can we equip ourselves more as men to avoid some of these pitfalls?
Yeah, that's the big $64,000 question, Tico, and that's significant. I'm trying to do that in my new marriage. I
Yeah.
just got married this year, June 5th. She is a wonderful woman.
Congrats.
Building a life with her is absolutely fantastic. It's a grace that God has given me, and I'm ever thankful for that. But I think first of all is to be mindful of bitterness and hurt that builds up in a relationship. A marriage doesn't just die one day. It dies slowly by 1,000 cuts. And we contribute as men to those cuts. We have got to try to make sure that those life cuts have time to heal and that we are tending to the healing of those things in this person that God has given to us. I think that's what happened in my relationship is bitterness built up layer upon layer upon layer, and we didn't tend to those things. I didn't tend to those things as I should have as a husband. The other is being together as a couple and fighting for each other, but also fighting for your marriage. To just say, you know what? The devil's going to get this marriage over our dead bodies.
That's right.
We are not going to let him win. God says at the end of Malachi, the last book of the Old Testament, he says, I hate divorce. I hate divorce. I tell you what, I could preach for hours on why God hates divorce. We need to fight for our marriages. We need to fight for our wives. We need to fight for our children. And I would contend that a good woman who sees a man fighting for her, fighting for his marriage, fighting for their relationship is a man that she will respect. And I am trying to do that in my marriage now. I want to do that. But also, I can say that I really did try to do that in my first marriage. I remember a buddy said to me, he said, Glenn, you are about to be divorced, but I have never seen any man fight for his marriage like you did. I didn't feel that at the time. I don't think he was lying to me. I don't think he was saying that just to be kind, but I needed to hear that. And we need to be able to do that work, to be able to fight, to be able to work. And sometimes the fighting for your marriage can be the exact opposite of what your wife feels like she needs.
Yeah.
That's a hard thing. That's a very, very hard thing. But I would say, going back to your question, Tico, is fighting for this woman in your life, becoming the man that you need to be, being willing to look at anything in your life you need to look at and giving that up to God and saying, God, change me into the man that you have envisioned me to be being married to this woman.
Do you think, because I know women tend to be, maybe not in all cases, but oftentimes they tend to be ahead in the relationship in some areas. They're thinking ahead, they're seeing things. And as men, we're so blind, we're so deaf. We're like, oh, I thought we worked on that already. Or I thought we discussed this. I didn't realize something else was needed.
Yeah.
Even in my own life, I see some of that. What are some basic tools, maybe two or three things that as men could help us to become more aware? Because sometimes we don't have the language and we don't even know some of these tools exist. And even if we do know that they exist, the relevance or the significance and value that we place on them, we're so concerned about other areas in our marriage, whether it's providing or protecting.
Yeah.
How do we shift?
Yeah.
How do we
No, no,
shift?
no. No, that's a massively big question. And I tell you what, even in my marriage now to Liz, you're
Yeah,
absolutely right. I think what we need to do as men, we need to realize this.
yeah,
He has given her certain giftings, he has given you certain giftings. We have to play this game as a one flesh union, think, but I also have to learn to live with you and to understand and appreciate the way that you think. And I think that is what all husbands and wives need to be able to do, is to understand themselves as men, but understand this woman that you have
yeah,
and try to see life from her perspective. To always do that is failure. You cannot become her.
yeah,
She is not right in everything that she does. Neither are you right in everything that you do. But
yeah,
it's two people being who they are, but also trying to see the other person. Why does my wife act like that? Why is my wife so concerned or worried about this aspect of life when I want to say, it's just not a big deal? You know what? It's a
mm,
big deal to her.
yeah,
So, how do you become the kind of man that can see things from her perspective, but then you bring in your perspective to lead and say, honey, pull her tight. This is how we need to move through this. I know this is important to you and this is important to you, but I think we need to move in this direction. What do you think about this? And what part of this am I not seeing? It's that be who you are, but also realize and understand who she is and what God made her to be. A buddy in just a couple months ago in my marriage now, he said, Glenn, don't try to change her. Relish who she is and adjust yourself according to her rhythms. And he's
mm.
absolutely right.
Come on, come
Yeah.
on. So good. I'm so grateful that you're doing what you're doing, the researches and everything that you're doing. I know you have some great resources out there, and one of them is one of your recent book, Raising Confident Daughters,
There's
Secure Daughters and Confident
confident
Sons.
sons. Yeah.
Tell me a little bit on what inspired you to write this book and some of what we could look for in it as parents or as in individuals. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, real quick. I wrote this book, and it's probably the most heavily researched book that I've ever done. But it was a book that I wrote to think about how do men and women, husbands and wives, mothers and fathers, as sexed or gendered individuals, come together to raise the little boys or little girls. You know what? In today's culture, this is not a popular thing to say, but to be human is to be male and female.
That's
And the
right.
only two options that we have as parents is to raise little boys to be good men or little girls to be good women. There aren't a third, fourth, fifth, sixth, 70th gender. There's male and female. But there's 101 ways that that little boy that God has given you can be a good man.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're typical boys. Sometimes they're more thoughtful, more sensitive, more artistic. Same thing with our little girls. Sometimes they're absolute girly girls, but sometimes they're a little bit more tomboyish. How do we as men, how do we as women contribute and cooperate with our spouse, a male or a female, to raise these little boys and little girls to be the men and women that God encouraged them to be? I intentionally or originally entitled this book Beyond Pink and Blue: Raising Gender Healthy Kids and Parents Too. It's about how do you break away from the rigid stereotypes of pink and blue, but still at the same time say, no, my little boy's boyness is a real thing and my girl's girlness is a real thing. And how does my wife or my husband, how do we contribute together to develop and nurture that boyhood or girlhood in the way that God has wired this child to be? That's
So
what the
good.
book is about.
So good. It's definitely an absolute read for any parent or anyone considering I would say even getting married, so you know some of these things ahead of time. This conversation should not end
Yeah. It's the
because
time
there's
has flown by.
so much rich resources in it. But any last words you have to share with men or families that you think they should know just from life and wherever they might be in that season of their journey?
You know what? I would end with this, Tico, is men, do not doubt the goodness of your manhood. We live in a culture today where toxic and masculinity are almost like those words go together. Your masculinity is a gift. Your wife needs you to be masculine. Not a macho guy necessarily, but masculine in the sense of you're a leader, you're a protector, you're a provider. You're a soft hearted man in a hard shell. And you need to be both of those things. Your children need that. Your wife needs that. Never, ever, ever apologize, man, for being masculine. Masculinity is a male virtue that the world needs you to demonstrate. And so don't listen to the toxic voices out there. Your masculinity is a good thing. It is a virtue, and the world needs it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining me on the climb, Glenn. It was a pleasure and an honor having this conversation, and I look forward to having more.
Yeah. Thank you, Tico. I enjoyed it.